Please claim me, she pleaded with a beggar, unaware he was the Alpha King. The city of Dramehold lay cloaked in shadows, its streets narrow and twisted, as if the buildings themselves were whispering secrets to one another. Lanterns flickered along the alleys, casting trembling light on walls blackened by soot and age. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and distant rain, curling through the crooked streets and seeping into every corner. In this city, the poor and the desperate often went unseen, swallowed by the darkness. Elara hurried through the alleyways, her worn shoes slapping against the cobblestones. Her hands clutched the thin cloak around her shoulders, but it did little against the cold that had settled deep in her bones. Her village lay beyond the city walls, struggling against famine and sickness, and she had come seeking help, a way to save her people. Every coin she had gathered over the months had been spent, leaving her with nothing but her own courage and determination. She rounded a corner and froze. There, huddled against a crumbling wall, was a figure. A man, or perhaps a boy, wrapped in tattered rags. His face was half hidden in shadow, but his eyes caught the light of a nearby lantern. They were sharp and calculating, yet there was a stillness about him, as if he belonged to the darkness itself. Elara hesitated, but desperation pushed her forward. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need your help. My village, they are starving. We have nothing. Please, help me." The figure stirred, lifting his head. He looked at her slowly as though weighing her words. Then he laughed, soft and low, a sound that carried both amusement and warning. "And why should I help you, little girl?" His voice was rough, yet strange warmth lingered beneath it. "I have nothing to give, and the world is cruel enough without me adding to it." I have nowhere else to turn," Elara said, her hands tightening into fists. She swallowed the fear that threatened to choke her. "I beg of you, just protect me for one night." "Just enough to find a way to save my people." The man's eyes studied her face, lingering on the fire in her gaze, the raw courage that had brought her to this dark alley alone. There was a strange tension in the air, as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for his answer. Finally, he said, "Very well." Elara's heart leapt. You will help me!" "Not for kindness," he said, rising to his feet. His movements were smooth, almost silent, like a shadow moving with purpose. "You will serve me, obey me, and follow my command. In return, you will have safety for one night. That is all I give." She nodded without hesitation, though a shiver ran down her spine.
I agree. I will do whatever you ask."
He studied her one last time before turning away. "Follow me," he said simply. The streets of Dramehold seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that made Elara's head spin, yet the figure moved with certainty, as if he knew every hidden passage, every shadowed corner. Finally, they stopped before a small, abandoned building, its windows broken, its door hanging on one hinge. "This will do for now," he said, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was dark and smelled of dust and decay. "Stay here. Do not leave, and do not make a sound." Elara nodded, stepping inside. The floor creaked beneath her feet, and she hugged herself, unsure if she should feel safe or afraid. The beggar, stood in the doorway for a moment, his eyes lingering on her. Then, without a word, he disappeared into the night. Hours passed slowly. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and carrying the distant sounds of the city. The shouts of merchants, the cries of children, the footsteps of guards. Elara sat huddled in a corner, her mind racing. Who was this man? Why had he agreed to help her? And most importantly, could she trust him? A sudden sound made her jump. The door creaked, and the beggar returned, carrying a small loaf of bread. He tossed it to her, and she caught it instinctively. "Eat," he said simply. "You will need your strength." She looked up at him, studying the shadows that hid his face. Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then shrugged.
I do not help lightly, but something about you. You are not like the others who come begging in the streets. You have fire in you, and fire is rare in a world that feeds on fear. Elara bit into the bread, savoring the warmth and relief it brought. For a moment the fear and hunger that had weighed on her vanished. She looked at the man, trying to see the person behind the rags and shadows. But his face remained hidden, unreadable, like a story she had not yet been allowed to understand. As the night deepened, a storm began to stir over the city. Rain began to patter against the roof, drumming a steady rhythm that matched the racing of her heart. Thunder rolled in the distance and lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the beggar's face. For a heartbeat, Elara thought she saw the sharp angles of a king's jaw, the strength in his posture, the weight of authority in the way he carried himself, even as a beggar. But the moment passed, and the shadows reclaimed him. He handed her a small blanket, motioning for her to rest. "Sleep now," he said. "Tomorrow we begin the work of survival." Elara lay down, wrapping the blanket around herself. She could hear him moving quietly in the room, tending to some unseen task. There was a strange comfort in his presence, a sense that despite the darkness of the city she was not entirely alone, and yet a part of her wondered what she had truly bargained for. Hours later she woke to the sound of whispering outside the door. Someone was moving through the shadows, their steps careful and deliberate. Elara held her breath, afraid to call out, afraid to move. The beggar stepped from the darkness, his eyes sharp, and a small, dangerous smile played on his lips. "They have come for you," he said. "The city does not forgive those who seek to change their fate." Elara's heart sank. Who is coming?" "Men who serve the crown," he said softly. "And perhaps men who serve something older, darker. You have drawn attention to yourself by begging and by daring to hope." Her throat tightened. "What do we do?" He knelt beside her, his gaze intense, almost frightening. "We survive," he said, "and we fight if we must. But remember this, you begged for me tonight. You do not yet know the man you have begged. By dawn, you may understand why some fires are dangerous to touch." The storm outside had grown louder, wind rattling the walls and rain lashing against the broken windows. Elara shivered, not just from cold, but from the strange mixture of fear and anticipation that had settled over her. The beggar, whatever he truly was, had stepped into her life like a shadowed flame, and she could feel the heat of it, even in the darkness. She tried to rest, but sleep was a stranger to her now. Her mind wandered to her village, to the starving children and the sickly elders who waited for her return. And yet, she could not stop thinking of the man who had appeared from the shadows, the man who had given her safety when no one else would. By the first light of dawn, the storm had passed. The streets glistened with rain, the alleys still damp and dark. The beggar stood at the door, watching the city awake. He seemed different in the morning light, less shadow and more substance. There was power in him, a quiet authority that made the hair on her arms stand. Elara rose, wrapping her cloak around her shoulders. She looked at him, her heart pounding. Who are you?" He smiled, but it was not a smile for her comfort. It was a smile that carried secrets, that hinted at a life far beyond the streets of Dramehold. "I am no one you have ever met," he said. "But soon you will know. And when you do, you may wish you had never begged me at all." With that he turned and disappeared into the streets, leaving Elara standing alone in the wet dawn. Her chest heaved with a mixture of fear and hope. She had asked for help. She had found a protector. And yet, the truth of who she had begged, the shadow that had claimed her trust, remained a mystery she would uncover only with time and danger. Elara swallowed hard, clutching the small loaf of bread he had given her. The city was waking, full of danger and secrets, and she was no longer just a girl begging for survival. She was caught in a story much larger than herself, one that would demand courage, loyalty, and the fire she had barely begun to understand. And somewhere in the distance the beggar, this mysterious, dangerous man, watched her,
knowing that the plea of one desperate girl had set events in motion that neither of them could ever undo. The city of Dramehold waited, silent but alive, as the story of fire, shadow, and longing began to unfold. The city of Dramehold seemed different in the early morning light. The rain had washed the streets, leaving the cobblestones slick and shining.
Shops opened with hesitant creaks, and merchants called out selling their meager wares. Yet the city's brightness did little to ease the shadow that clung to Elara's heart.
She still felt the memory of the man, the beggar, whose eyes had held something she could not name, something that both frightened and fascinated her. She followed the winding streets until she reached a narrow square where the air carried the faint scent of smoke and iron. And there he was, standing as if he had been waiting for her. The rags and shadowed cloak from the night before were gone, replaced by dark clothing that hinted at strength beneath simplicity. There was a presence about him, a quiet authority that commanded even the restless city to bow to his steps. "You have slept," he said, his voice low and measured.
"Good. We have work to do."
Elara blinked. "Work?" she asked.
I thought you only promised me safety."
He looked at her with a piercing gaze. "Safety is not enough in this city. Survival requires understanding."
"And understanding requires you to step into my world." She hesitated.
His words were heavy with meaning she could not yet grasp, but the hunger in her village, the faces of children and elders she had left behind, propelled her forward. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll follow you." The man's lips curved into a shadow of a smile.
"Then follow me." They moved through Dramehold's twisting streets until the narrow alleys gave way to wider roads. At the edge of the city stood a palace, its stone walls dark and imposing, crowned with spires that clawed at the sky. Soldiers patrolled the gates, their armor glinting in the wet morning light. The palace was alive with whispers and secrets, a place where power ruled with iron fists and subtle cunning.
He led her inside through a side entrance, away from the curious eyes of guards and servants. The halls were cool, the air heavy with candle smoke and the scent of old stone.
Tapestries depicting battles and kings hung along the walls, faded with age. Each step echoed like a drumbeat in Elara's chest, reminding her that she was far from the streets she knew, far from the simple desperation of her village.
Finally, they arrived in a small chamber, sparsely furnished with a table, a chair, and a flickering candle. The man, Kale, though she did not yet know his true name, gestured for her to sit.
"This is where you will remain for now. Observe, learn, and do not speak unless spoken to. The court is not kind to those who wander unprepared."
Elara nodded, taking a seat and trying to calm her racing heart. She felt both fear and curiosity. The world she had stepped into was vast, filled with danger she could not yet see. Yet she sensed that the man who had brought her here, this beggar who was somehow more than he appeared, was at the center of it all. Hours passed, and the palace came alive with movement. Servants scurried through corridors, carrying trays of food and piles of parchment. Guards marched in precise formation, their boots echoing in rhythm. And then, Kale emerged from the shadows, dressed not as a beggar but as someone who carried the weight of command effortlessly. His presence demanded attention. The very air seemed to bend around him. Elara could not tear her eyes away. There was a sharpness to him, a controlled strength that made her pulse quicken. And yet, beneath the power she glimpsed a shadow of something softer, something buried deep and guarded carefully. He moved to a window looking out over the courtyard. "The court is cruel," he said without turning to her.
"It punishes weakness, rewards cunning, and forgives nothing. If you are to survive here, you must understand this truth. And you must choose. Will you serve, or will you falter?"
Elara swallowed hard. I will serve," she whispered.
"I will do my best."
He finally turned to her, his gaze sharp as if measuring her very soul. "Your fire is evident," he said.
"But fire alone is not enough. There are shadows that even fire cannot touch." Remember this, girl. Trust no one, not even those who claim to be allies. Days passed in a blur of observation and small tasks. Alara learned the rhythms of the palace.
She watched Kale closely, noting the way he commanded respect without raising his voice, the careful way he handled conflicts among nobles, the rare moments when his eyes betrayed regret or pain. One evening, she followed him to a balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The city below shimmered with life, yet from this height it seemed small, fragile, insignificant. Kale leaned against the stone railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Why do you watch me?" Alara asked softly, stepping closer.
He did not answer immediately. Finally he said, "Because you do not look away." "Most do. Most fear what they cannot understand." She hesitated, then asked, "And what is it you want me to understand?" "Power," he said simply, "and the cost it demands." "Everything in this court, everything in this city, is bound by power. To survive, you must learn it and respect it." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had imagined her life as simple, a village in need, a girl with courage. But this world was vast, dangerous, and unforgiving. And yet, despite her fear, she could not deny the pull she felt toward Kaol, the man who had saved her when no one else would, the man whose presence seemed to command even the shadows themselves. In the days that followed, whispers of conspiracy reached her ears. Nobles plotted against one another, servants passed secrets with nervous glances, and rumors of the crown's enemies stirred unease in every corridor. Alara realized that the safety Kale had promised was fragile, dependent on his unseen hand guiding events from the shadows. One night, as she delivered a message to a distant chamber, she overheard two men speaking in hushed tones. "The Alpha King will not know until it is too late," one said. "And when he discovers the betrayal, it will be blood." Alara froze. The words were heavy with danger, and she knew they referred to Kael, the man she had begged for protection. Her heart raced. If these plots succeeded, the very man who had saved her life could be destroyed. She returned to Kael, her hands trembling. "There are people plotting against you," she said, her voice urgent. "They speak of betrayal, and they mention the crown." Kael's expression darkened, shadows falling across his face. "I know," he said quietly. "The court is never silent. Every shadow has a voice. But not all plots reach me yet." He stepped closer, and for a moment his presence overwhelmed her. "Your courage brought you here, Alara, but courage alone cannot protect you from everything. You must learn to trust your instincts and to act when the time comes." Alara nodded, though fear and uncertainty swirled within her. She wanted to ask more, to understand the full truth of the man before her, but the moment passed. Kael turned and disappeared down the hall, leaving her with only the echoes of his words and the pulse of her own heart. That night, Alara could not sleep. She stared at the ceiling of her small chamber, listening to the distant sounds of the palace, the muffled conversations, the soft footsteps, the occasional clash of metal. Her mind replayed every moment she had spent with Kael, every glance, every word. She could not shake the feeling that she was part of something much larger than herself, something both beautiful and dangerous. The next morning the palace stirred with unusual urgency. Guards moved with unusual precision, and servants whispered hurriedly. Kael summoned her to a private chamber, and when she entered, she saw the tension etched across his features. "They have acted sooner than expected," he said, his voice low. "The conspiracy moves faster than I anticipated. You must stay close. There is danger, and you may be called upon to make choices that will test your heart and your courage." Elara's pulse quickened. "Choices?" she asked. "Life and death," he said simply. "For some, and for others, loyalty and survival are one and the same." She swallowed, her fear mingling with the strange thrill. The man who had appeared from the shadows of Dramehold was not just a protector. He was a king,
a force of power and danger, and her world had changed in ways she could not yet comprehend. Cale stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her catch her breath.
"Remember, Elara," he said, "you begged for me once. By the end of this, you will understand that some fires once lit cannot be contained." Outside, the city of Dramehold continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the storm brewing within the walls of the palace.
Inside, Elara felt that storm, felt its pull, and knew that her life and her heart were now intertwined with a man she barely understood. And somewhere in the shadows of the palace, enemies plotted and destiny began to stir.
Elara had entered the Court of Shadows, and she knew deep in her soul that nothing would ever be the same.
The night was thick with fog, curling around the palace towers like a living thing. Dramehold slept uneasily under the heavy sky, the faint glow of lanterns casting pale circles on wet cobblestones. Inside the palace, Elara walked silently through the long corridors, her footsteps muted against the stone floor. She had been summoned by Cale, and her heart pounded with anticipation and unease. He waited for her in a small chamber at the edge of the palace, lit only by a single flickering candle. The shadows clung to him, draping him in mystery as always. Yet tonight, there was something more in his eyes, a weight, a sorrow she had not seen before.
"Sit!"
he commanded gently, and she obeyed. The air between them was heavy, charged with unspoken thoughts.
"Elara," he began, his voice softer than usual, "you have seen the court, the conspiracies, the games of power, but there is a truth you do not yet understand. A truth I cannot show to anyone, not even my closest advisors." Her brow furrowed. "A truth about you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. I am bound by a curse, a weight that was placed upon my family long ago. It grants power, yes, but it also takes. It isolates me, shapes my decisions, and demands sacrifice. That is why I am feared, why the court obeys my word without question. The power, you see, comes at a cost." Elara's stomach tightened. "A curse?" "What kind of curse?" Cale's gaze darkened. "A curse of fire and shadow. It feeds on my anger, my fear, my mistakes. If I yield to it, I become something monstrous."
"Something the world cannot contain." She studied him, seeing the conflict etched into every line of his face. The man who had seemed so untouchable, so strong, was also fragile in ways that frightened her.
"And can it be broken?"
she asked softly. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes revealing a hint of vulnerability she had never seen. "Perhaps—"
"But it is not a task for me alone. The curse demands courage, loyalty, and
a heart willing to confront what is dark without turning away. That is why you are here, Elara."
"You are fire, perhaps enough to face the shadow within me." Her pulse quickened. "Me? Why me? Because you begged for me when you had nothing, when hope seemed impossible," he said, stepping closer. "You dared to trust when the world told you not to. That is rare. That is why I allowed you to see this court, to survive the dangers that others could not. And now you must decide whether you are ready to face the darkness by my side." Elara swallowed hard. The idea terrified her, yet also stirred something deep within, a courage she did not know she possessed. I will try," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I will face it." Cale's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Very well. Then we begin." The next day, Cale led her to a part of the palace she had never seen.
A hidden door, carved with intricate symbols, opened into a stairwell that descended deep beneath the city. The walls were lined with old runes that glowed faintly in the dim light, casting an eerie glow on the steps as they descended. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a faint metallic scent like iron and old blood.
"This place," Elara whispered, her voice echoing slightly.
"What is it?" "It is where the curse resides," Cale said, his voice low. where my ancestors bound it to the stone, to the air, to the shadows. Here, I confront it, and here you will learn what it takes to break it. The stairwell opened into a vast chamber, a cavern of stone and darkness.
At its center was a pool of black water, smooth as glass, reflecting not only their faces but visions that seemed to shift beneath the surface, memories of Cale's past, of battles, betrayals, and sorrow. Elara stepped closer, drawn by the strange pull of the water.
"What is this?" "The shadow pool," Cale said. "It reflects the truth of those who stand before it."
To break the curse, one must face not only my darkness but their own. You must be ready to see yourself as clearly as you see me, and still choose to stay.
Her stomach tightened. I think I can.
Cale studied her, his eyes searching hers as if weighing the courage she claimed. Words are easy, actions are not.
"Look into the pool." Elara stepped forward, her reflection trembling on the surface. As she gazed into it, the water shifted.
Images formed, visions of failure, of her village suffering, of her own fears made manifest. She saw herself faltering, unable to save those she loved, crushed beneath the weight of the impossible task she had undertaken. A sob caught in her throat. She wanted to turn away, to flee from the truth the pool demanded. But a quiet voice deep in her chest told her to stay, to be brave even when bravery was hardest. Cale stepped beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder.
"Do not be afraid to see what lies within you," he said. "The curse will test you, but it will not define you. Only you can do that."
Elara drew a deep breath, centering herself. "I see it," she whispered. "I see my fear, and I choose to face it." The water shimmered, and the shadows shifted. A figure emerged, tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that glowed faintly. It was Cale, but not Cale. The man within him twisted by the curse, the fire and shadow made visible. "You cannot run from me," the figure said, its voice a low echo of Cale's own.
"I am the part of him the world fears. I am the rage, the anger, the weight of the crown. If you fail, I will consume all." Elara stepped forward, her hands trembling but her heart steady.
"I will not fail," she said. "I face you."
"Not because I trust you, but because I choose to see the man behind the shadow."
The figure recoiled, the shadows around it quivering. Cale's real form stepped closer, his own eyes meeting hers. The tension between them was electric, as if the room itself held its breath.
"You are fire," Cale said softly, "and fire can burn shadow."
The cursed shadow swirled, lashing out, testing her resolve.
Elara felt fear rise like a tide, threatening to drag her under, but she planted her feet, raised her chin, and stared into the darkness.
Slowly, deliberately, she reached out her hand. "Face me," she said, her voice unwavering.
"I am not afraid of the shadow, and I will not turn away from the man I know exists beyond it." The shadow recoiled with a sound like wind through hollow stone. Light began to seep into the chamber, glimmering along the walls, along the surface of the pool. Cale's form became solid, strong, human once more. The curse shrank back, hissing and retreating into the depths of the water, but not entirely gone.
"You have done more than I could have hoped," Cale said, his voice thick with emotion. "Most would falter before even speaking to the shadow. You stood your ground."
Elara's chest heaved.
"It was not just me," she said softly.
"It was you. You trusted me enough to let me see. And I trust you enough to face it with you."
Cale's hand brushed hers briefly, a small grounding touch.
"Trust is rare in this world," he said. "But you have earned it, in ways I cannot yet repay."
They lingered in silence, both breathing heavily, both feeling the strange bond that had formed between them, the bond forged in fire, shadow, and mutual courage. The next days were filled with preparation. Cale showed Elara parts of the city she had never imagined, places where magic lingered in whispers and where shadows bent with purpose. He taught her the subtle ways of the court, how to watch, how to listen, how to move without being seen. Each lesson carried danger, and each success brought her closer to understanding him, closer to the man she had begged for protection, and yet the curse was never far from their thoughts. Cale moved with careful precision, aware that one misstep could allow the darkness to rise again. Elara felt the weight of her role, the responsibility of her courage. Together they prepared, knowing that the court was still filled with enemies, and the future of the kingdom, perhaps even their lives, hung in the balance. One night as they returned from the shadow pool, Cale paused in the corridor, looking down at her. "You have seen the darkness, faced it, and still chosen to stand," he said.
You are fire, Elara, and fire can change even the deepest shadow.
Elara looked up at him, her heart beating fast.
And you, she whispered. Can you change?
Crowell's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability shining through.
I am learning, he said, because of you. Outside, the wind stirred through Dramehold, carrying whispers of danger, of plots, of shadows yet to be faced.
But inside the palace, two souls, one burdened by power, the other by courage, stood together, ready to confront whatever came next. The curse had been faced, but the storm was not yet over. The first light of dawn broke over Dramehold, spilling gold and crimson across the palace towers. The city below stirred, unaware of the storm that had been brewing in its heart, and the greater storm yet to come. Inside the palace, the air was thick with tension. Cale and Elara stood together, ready to confront the final challenge that would either break the curse forever or consume them both. Cale's eyes, sharp and commanding, scanned the chamber.
This is the moment, he said softly. The shadow pool has been confronted, the curse weakened, but not destroyed. Tonight, we end it. Together.
Elara nodded, a mixture of fear and determination rising in her chest.
I am ready, she whispered.
I will face it with you. He reached out, placing a steady hand over hers. You must remember, Elara, courage alone is not enough. The curse feeds on doubt, fear, and hesitation.
You must trust me, and more importantly, you must trust yourself. They moved through the palace corridors in silence, descending once more into the hidden stairwell that led to the shadow pool. The air grew colder with every step, the scent of stone and iron heavy in their lungs. Faint lights glimmered from the runes carved into the walls, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to reach for them. When they arrived, the pool awaited, black and still, reflecting not only their faces but the flickering echoes of their past struggles. The shadows within the water shifted and twisted, forming the familiar figure of Cale's curse, the monstrous version of himself, dark and impossible to control. You have come far, the shadow said, its voice a low rumble that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. But the end is not yours to claim. I am the fire in him, the darkness he cannot escape.
You cannot destroy me!
Elara stepped forward, her hands trembling but her gaze unwavering.
I do not seek to destroy you, she said. I seek to show him, show us both, that light can exist even in shadow. That courage and love can face fear without faltering. The shadow recoiled slightly, as if startled by the strength in her words.
Cale stepped beside her, his own presence anchoring the light and warmth she brought. I will not let you take me, he said to the shadow.
This ends now.
The pool stirred violently, waves of darkness rising like black smoke. Visions of battles, betrayal, and pain swirled around them. Cale's cursed self reached out with long, shadowed fingers, testing them, probing their courage. Elara's pulse quickened. Every instinct in her screamed to retreat, to let the shadows win. But she remembered the village she had vowed to save, the trust she had placed in Cale, and the fire that had drawn her here in the first place. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to the pool.
We are not afraid of you, she said. We will face you, together.
Cale's hand brushed hers again, a grounding touch that lent strength to her trembling heart.
Stay with me, he whispered.
The shadow lunged, and for a moment the room was filled with swirling darkness and chaos. But Alara did not waver. She planted her feet firmly and held her gaze on the pool. Slowly, the shadow began to shrink, the darkness retreating, unable to withstand the combined courage and trust of the two of them. Cale stepped fully into the light, facing the remaining shadows with a calm authority. "You have no power over me," he said.
Not when I am whole, not when I choose who I am. And I choose light. I choose her. I choose us."
The darkness shrieked, a sound that echoed off the walls like thunder, before dissolving into the black water. The pool grew still, reflecting only the faces of Cale and Alara, human, strong, and triumphant. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence was filled with relief, awe, and an unspoken connection that bound them more tightly than words ever could. Cale finally exhaled, running a hand over his face. "It is done," he said softly.
"The curse is broken, because you faced it with me."
Alara shook slightly, the tension in her body slowly melting away.
"It was not just me," she said. "It was us! We faced it together!"
Cale turned to her, his eyes intense, the weight of his title and power softened by the vulnerability she had witnessed.
"You have shown me something I have not felt in centuries," he said. "Trust, courage, and the choice to love despite fear. You have changed me, Alara. Forever."
She felt warmth bloom in her chest, a mixture of relief, admiration, and something deeper she could not yet name. "And you have taught me that even the strongest shadows can be faced if you have someone to stand with you," she said softly. They lingered in the chamber, the silence now a companion rather than a threat. The palace above them continued its life, oblivious to the transformation that had occurred in the hidden chamber below. The next days were filled with subtle changes. The court sensed it first, the shift in Cale's presence, less fearsome, more controlled, tempered by the trust he now shared with Alara. Nobles who had whispered against him found their plots crumbling, undone not by power alone but by the bond that had grown between him and the girl who had begged for his protection. Alara adapted to her new role, moving through the palace with a confidence born of courage and experience. She no longer felt like an outsider, no longer afraid of shadows or intrigue. She understood the delicate balance of trust, loyalty, and power. And through it all, Cale was beside her, not just as protector, but as partner, his respect and admiration evident in every glance, every small gesture. One evening they stood on the balcony overlooking Dramehold. The city stretched below them, alive with light and movement, and the sky blazed with the colors of sunset. The wind stirred through their hair, carrying a promise of something greater. "You have faced more than anyone should," Cale said softly, his hand brushing hers. "Yet here you are, stronger than I imagined, braver than I hoped." Alara looked at him, her heart full.
"And you," she asked. "You faced the curse, the shadow, the court, and you still stand."
Strong but human. Powerful but compassionate.
"You have changed, Cale. Because of what we faced together."
He smiled, the first truly unguarded smile she had seen from him. "And I choose to continue changing."
"With you, by my side."
Her chest swelled with emotion. "And I choose to stay, with you."
"By your side."
He took a step closer, the distance between them closing, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath.
"Alara," he whispered, "you begged for me once, when you had nothing. Now."
"You are my equal, my partner, my choice. Will you walk with me, not as someone who follows, but as someone who stands with me?" Her eyes glistened with tears she did not try to hide. "Yes," she said softly, "I will." The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the city in gold and shadow. Cale reached out and took her hand, their fingers entwining in a bond forged through fear, courage, and trust. Together they looked out over Dramehold, the city alive with light, and the palace behind them now a place of hope rather than fear. The court had seen a king tempered by shadow and fire, and a girl who had become more than she ever imagined. Together they would face whatever came next, not as protector and beggar, not as king and servant, but as partners, equals in strength, heart, and courage. And in the quiet of the evening, as the first stars appeared in the sky, Cale whispered almost to himself, "We survived the darkness, and now we create the light." Alara leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and knew that no matter the storms to come, they would face them together. The shadow pool was silent now, the curse broken, but the story was far from over. For the first time in centuries, Cale and Alara could choose their path, their hearts intertwined, their courage tested and proven. And as they looked out over Draimhold, the city of shadows, they knew that light and love could exist even in the darkest of places.
Together they had faced the impossible, and together they would rise.